With AI, AR, and apps that are amazing. Accessible Adobe to ace my animations. Brain popping off beats on boards built by Boxlight. Boss set Bitmoji. Blooming bookworms is my birthright. Chat GPT comes a common core collapse. Canva creations on my Chromebook are cracked. Dealing with data dank discussions with a Dynabox. Daily doorway diligence. My drone got docs. Engaging everyone. Empathize simpatico. Ever fight econ. Expanding my ego. Farfetch, Firefox, fossil phone, flashbacks, fresh shit, vocabulary, faster Flipgrid feedback. I think it's going. Girls Who Code. Jim. Anyway, we'll call it there.
Welcome, everybody, back to another exciting episode of the Undisrupted podcast. Adam, which is a better gig in your life? You and I both worked in different school districts, different sizes. What do you feel like is the best kind of gig for you? Is it working in a school district that has multiple high schools, giant area, or is it a single high school type of district? So which one to you is best?
Me personally, you know what? I have to say, doing both, I kind of prefer a smaller district to the tune of, one of those spaces where everybody knows your name. It's something when you go to the grocery store, you see somebody and they're talking to you, as a teacher or as a parent. It's those connections that you can make. Just for me personally, it's no right or wrong answer to this one, but I just kind of like that feeling, knowing people and making those connections. And it's a little bit easier to do it in a small town and to have those relationships. I mean, you may see them at your, houses of worship. You may see them at the Longhorn or just getting your steak. Those are those fun moments that you kind of get in those smaller towns that you may not get in a large city where there's so many students and so many teachers running through a space that you don't necessarily get a chance to make those connections. No shade to a larger district. I love working in the larger districts as well. I mean, but with that being said, what's a large district? Because some people, a large district may be 150,000 students. To some people, a large district may be 6,000 students because their district only has like 100 students. So, it's kind of the size does not matter in this case.
I was waiting for it. I mean, it's just, you can't talk about size without Adam bringing that up. So I do think, I think we're supposed to disagree, but I think I agree with you on this one because I've done both. I worked at Austin ISD, which had 90,000 students, pretty good sized district in Texas, and then Eanes, which had 8,000, which again in this state is a smallish district, a single high school, but in other states it could be a large district. To me, the single high school where everybody's going to the same spot, small town feel. I just felt like I was running all over the place in Austin. I was doing so many different things that I didn't really get a chance to really build those relationships. Which I think is a challenge of working in a large district, which is why we decided to bring on the show today Sean Arnold, who works at a very decent sized district, I believe New York City, it says here, the largest district in the United States of America. New York City DOE, Director of School Pathways and Computer Science. Sean Arnold, welcome to the podcast.
Hey, how's it going? I certainly have my opinions on this question, but it might not be entirely what you think. So I should give this little backstory. I grew up in Chicago, but when I was in high school, my family moved to Barry, Illinois, home of like the Barry Apple Festival and like less than 1,000-ish or so people, which is like in the gut of Illinois, and it would be like the belly button.
Oh, okay. Nice. Thank you for describing that.
Yes. Yeah. Just to give you some geolocation. And I will say, you're making good points about, immediate impact and flexibility in a small district, right? I've had conversations with folks upstate in New York in very small districts where they're like, oh yeah, I went over and we wanted to go one-to-one with devices. So I talked to the principal, and then I went and I spoke to the superintendent, who's literally the next door over in the same building, because we only have like 300 kids in the whole district. And boom, we decided we were going to do it. And so that sort of mobility is not a thing that exists in New York City, on the citywide level anyway, in an individual school maybe. But the scale of impact and the other things that I think you can really do in a large district, the sort of scale of affecting the nation and affecting the educational technology companies that exist and draw them in, like, you can't bring a bunch of teachers together to meet up at the Google offices in Chelsea if you live in Paducah, Kentucky. You can't do it if, have everybody hang out at the Microsoft Center in Times Square, or these Adobe events that we had last week, and bring teachers from around the country to these kinds of events if it's in Pocatello, Idaho. Not that I haven't been to both of those places, because I have. Both Paducah, Kentucky, and Pocatello, Idaho.
I'm quickly pulling it. I didn't realize we were going to need our map for this interview, but I'm pulling it up right now.
Yeah. I'm all over the place. Yeah. It's going to be fun with flags. I could start discussing all the state flags that I enjoy.
I feel like that episode of Animaniacs where Yakko is like naming all the places.
Yeah, that's right. Yes. Wow, another good reference point.
But you bring up some great points there. I mean, and that's the beauty of a larger district size, also being able to have the impact on thousands or tens of thousands, or in some cases hundreds of thousands of students with those things that you're doing, and also being able to have an imprint where if your district says something or can get other districts behind it, you can have a voice for those smaller districts in some of those cases that may not have that push with a Renaissance or whomever. But if New York City Schools is saying something, we better listen, because that's a large district.
Yeah, I have examples like Pandemic Land, at a time when in New York City, we were basically like, oh, it's not safe enough, and people are getting flagged. So Zoom, you're out, right? Suddenly the CEO of Zoom is there meeting with our, chief technical officers, and and I'm in those meetings, and we're talking about all the things that need to happen, and the great things that Zoom does, but the sort of security features that need to be put in place. And literally they have their engineers on it that day, and you have the CEO of Zoom talking on CNN later that same day about how excited he is that he's working directly with New York City schools, and they're making these changes that have to, there is meaningful impact that can happen on the good end in that way. But I've also seen on the lesser nice end, if we're being entirely honest, in smaller districts and areas, and bigger impacts that can happen. So, we talk about Texas schools, and because Texas is huge and oversized, and the impact of decisions on textbooks there happen and affect the country all over the place. Meanwhile, in a small district, if you have a bad leader sort of ruling by fiat, there is no really workaround, and there's no sort of oversight for that or countermands that can happen if there's this one man ruling party in a small district. You're sort of stuck with that, sort of like you are with the small town sheriffs.
Right.
Yeah.
And I know here in Texas, like the University of Texas has this motto: "What starts here changes the world." It seems very similar to what's happening in New York City. And I remember, we're contractually obligated to mention AI in every podcast, so I'm going to bring it up now because, of course, first thing, splashy headlines, January, a couple months after ChatGPT comes out, New York's blocking it, New York City's blocking it, and then they started to kind of change a little bit, and they started saying, okay, now maybe we don't run away from it. Maybe we embrace it and we become the leader in this area. What's going on? What are your thoughts on AI in general? But then also tell us kind of what's the lay of the land in NYC right now.
I get to actually be part of those conversations, and my CS for All team more broadly. We get to contribute heavily to those conversations with our new school chancellor on how artificial intelligence is being used and allowed, and because CS for All, I'll say specifically, we were addressing artificial intelligence long before ChatGPT. We were having discussions around it. And a lot of those discussions that I don't think are happening enough are on the equity and ethics of artificial intelligence. A lot of the conversations right now are like, look at the cool stuff it can do. And, is it going to be Terminator 2 and burn down the world? Like on those long-ended spectrums of it. And not all the genuinely important pieces that go into it in terms of equity and inclusiveness and ethical considerations on, okay, let's look at how this might be used in a military context, but also let's look at the data that's going in and simply, draw me a picture of a computer programmer and what that should look like. And why is it always a white dude with glasses on, right? And because the sort of garbage in, garbage out phenomenon. To that point, there was a great app being designed that was supposed to help tell if your mole was cancerous or not. Cool idea. Wonderful concept. Turns out that rulers cause cancer, because in these series of photos, a lot pulled from doctors and medical places, when doctors were taking those photographs, they would put like little rulers and measurements next to it. So any picture that had a ruler in it, right? And those are sort of those things that we don't necessarily consider in these spaces and places where these things are going to be designed. and they can be awesome and useful to, help address and note if we have cancer, but also rulers now have cancer. So
Beware of rulers. Yeah.
I know that sounds like a whole episode by itself.
Yes, it does. I was just thinking that.
So yeah, I love a lot of the cool things, a lot of the generative visual pictures and things you can pull from Adobe and Canva and all the places that people who were a little reticent to be creators can now easily jump in and be big time creators. But what is the point when we're having elections and other matters come up, and these ideas of deep fakes come into the vein, and we already had issues of interference and sway and all that kind of stuff on a large cultural scale. When suddenly you think that a leader of a major nation is declaring war on another nation because somebody made a video and posted it on the internet, but no, that person never said that. What are the issues that arise?
They made that movie with Matthew Broderick way back in the day. Remember War Games? It was like all fake. It was all fake, but yeah, it's still DEFCON 5. Here we are. Yeah, I think it's interesting that we're on this still up track of generative AI, but then timing wise, what's going to be interesting, it's going to mature right when we start hitting the heavy election cycle next year. I wonder, because social media, of course, had its effect. This will definitely have its effect, and it's just a matter again of how do we educate the populace on it, and that's more than just the students in New York City too.
And it's that added layer, and this is apolitical in nature, in the fact that we have a lot of trusted sources are now being questioned. At one point, I don't care what channel you watch, but if you watch the news and it was on the news, pick your station, you could trust it. If the anchor behind the desk said something, it was factual, it was the news. Now that's gotten a little, swayed one way or the other. So you can't necessarily, there's a thought, you can't trust the news. So if you can't trust the news, you can't trust what's out there on the internet. What can we trust, or who can we trust? When in AI, I could come up with an argument to support the fact that's the fact, or the alternative fact that's the fact that's out there. So for me, that's when I start getting a little worried and scared. Like you mentioned, going into the election cycle with AI, because what's a fact now? You could tell kids, hey, check your sources, but what sources can we check?
I would say I'm not angry about the idea of us pushing everyone now to a place of greater disbelief, in the sense that if it makes everybody, generally question the information that's coming in, and now young people are recognizing I can't just rely on everything at face value, and we all are starting to learn, how do I find reliable and meaningful resources and check these things? Like if it forces us all to become better, and I hate the term fact checker in this regard, because everybody thinks they're a fact checker because they watch one YouTube video
Right.
on a subject. That's not what that means.
You did my research.
But actual genuine dive into research that's certified, research that's credible, what counts for a reliable source versus an unreliable source, and people have different mindsets on those in different regards. But if we all start to become set to question all these things, I don't hate that. We should, I think, always be questioning the information that's coming in and our leaders. And there were times like information would come in textbooks in schools that was deeply and heavily biased in the quote olden days, where we trusted the Dan Rathers and whatnot of the world. But because it was in that, we didn't think about it, but they weren't teaching about the Tulsa massacre, and yet we never heard about it. But we should have been questioning that stuff, right?
Yeah, that's interesting. You mentioned textbooks, because as much as we as much as we have this openness of information nowadays, it's funny that there's still stories out there of certain states, and I won't name them, Florida, that are still trying. I mean, Texas, to be honest. I mean, here too. I mean, it's just like we're going to sculpt the thinking based on what we want the kind of the output to be. And I think it's always been the case that we've had this bias. And I think now we're finally starting to awaken to it. I love that point you brought up. That critical thinking is what we've been trying to get kids to do for, forever. And now they're starting to do it. And it's almost like, wait, no, but don't do too much, because if you do too much, you may, question your origins, or your health, or your sexuality, or your race, or whatever. And that's a dangerous thing for us to actually think that way. Right. What are your thoughts on that? Like that idea that let's keep the kids away from it.
I mean, me, honestly, I question everything all the time. but I'm really neurotic, so maybe don't go by me. But as a resource to teachers, anybody who might be listening to this, there's a thing called the News Literacy Project, and they have some really great training resources for teachers and students so that they can go ahead and guide. And as we start to classify things in our mind as factually based, but a novel concept. So we can watch a movie that's a fictional movie that conveys real and serious concepts, right? We can watch a television show that speaks about human historical experiences, about historical figures like Malcolm X or Harvey Milk or something like that. And again, it's a story written and told, but it can give us valuable information in that context. Same time, there's biased information, and we have to take who's giving it and where it's biased. And then we get into the far-flung regions, and it explores this too, of propaganda on places that, and trying to discern between those sort of categories and spaces of information that's coming to us. So News Literacy Project, that was the name of it, News Literacy Project. It's a nonprofit, but they have lots of digital tools online and stuff for educators and students and just families and stuff who want to learn more and connect. I think that's a good place and space. And there's ways we can train students. I will say, this is a sort of, note for myself. Online, if you look up CS for All NYC, we have several lessons. They're all free curriculums around informational literacy and around artificial intelligence and equity pieces. Our whole equity team does amazing work around it. And we have a great things regarding generative and input into AI and how your students can go ahead and create their own AI systems and see some of the flaws and things inherent in those systems that they're creating that can echo and reflect the ones that exist in the world around them.
Yep. Check out the link in the description. Check those out. So let me ask you this. We mentioned you're in like the largest district, the mecca of everything, New York, the country revolves around New York.
The city.
Yeah, just the city.
So let me ask you this. Yeah. So what are some challenges that, and you kind of mentioned this a little earlier, but what are some other challenges that you think goes with being in a district of that size?
I mean, obviously, one of the first and foremost ones, there's bureaucracy, right? In a place and space as big as this. And some of that's been torn down in ways. And every time we get a new mayor, we get a new chancellor, which is like our super king or queen of schools. Right now, it's a king of schools. We got a new mayor, Eric Adams. He appointed this guy from Eagle Academy, who's his friend. For better or worse, whatever, they shift and they change, but they have different priorities that shift and change the system with us, right? And in that, because of that scale, the other huge challenge is communication, like effective communication across a body that's made up of, 1 million plus students, right? And 100,000 plus staff members. That's hard to communicate effectively on that scale. And it does not always filter down to all these spaces and places it could go. And there are things that have been advanced and changed and moved to try to hit all of that. But, there are people that miss important pieces of info that aren't coming out. And some folks that still don't check their DOE email, right? Where if it's going through to all of those. Training. That's
how do you do that?
Learning across that vast scale. And obviously you can break everything down into smaller elements. So training on a school-based level, training on a district-based level. There are 32 geographic districts in New York City that make up the larger New York City public schools system. And that's not counting home schools and our citywide special education, But, each of those districts has their own sets and resources. But then that gets into the area of haves and have-nots, right? In places and spaces in the city. So what you're getting in Lower Manhattan may not be the same that you're getting in the South Bronx. Mm-hmm. And that in a place and scale of this, as much as, we mentioned Texas and Florida, the same inequities and everything exist across here, right? This city was built by Robert Moses. Anybody wants to look up his history and literally the way communities were cut and divided specifically, and who got divided in the haves and have-nots, and the fact that the bridges out to Long Island were lowered so that the scruffy folks from New York City couldn't go out to the lovely beaches in Long Island.
Wow.
It's literally built on that.
learning history. I mean, it makes sense because I knew that there was a lot with the boroughs that set up where you had your different kind of families and communities would come over from Europe. They just got kind of put in their own little space, but I didn't realize that they actually and it makes sense, right? We don't want you out. We don't want you out to our fancy place. So we're gonna literally turn off the bridges from you.
I mean, that's literally where like the other side of the tracks came from. They literally made those tracks to separate the haves and the have-nots.
On the other side of that coin, you also have so many different cultures and foods and human beings connecting together in these places and spaces. There's well over a few hundred languages spoken in New York City, and we have translation at least for the main dozen ones here regularly for students and staff and teachers who need it. So those sorts of resources are widely available to those who need it. And we're able to meet that need because of our scale. To that point, in the midst of the pandemic, when it's like, okay, these kids are in spaces, some of them unhoused populations, some of them in shelter, some of them in public housing. Let's get 600,000 iPads, and all, not just with Wi-Fi, but we want them with, so that they can connect to the phone networks and everything. Yeah. And so kids who are in unhoused spaces and places, getting them first, and all of these sorts of cool things. And I'm getting to go in and help work with kids and set up. And I'm one of the first ones that go back in person, working with kids with disabilities, social distance diaper changes. We're not going to get into that. But able to make it happen at a scale that's really, really meaningful to. It doesn't fix anything. It doesn't solve all the problems, but it does cut into that inequity somewhat. And it does start to not fully level, but work towards leveling some of these scales that have long been unlevel.
Yeah, and you can hear the passion in Sean's voice, and I will tell you, I got to bring this up because we've had former Poetry Slam winners on the show, but never an active Poetry Slam champion. And for those of you that don't know, Sean Arnold is the 2023 Poetry Slam champion that Adam and I got to co-host down at ISTE in Philly. Yep, and we've had Amy Jackson on the show, previous champ, Steve Dembo on the show, previous champ. So can you give us a little? First of all, you got the belt. You could show us the belt. Those of you who are watching this, you're listening, you're just gonna have to imagine this magical belt as he throws it over his shoulder. Yes. Pretty heavy. It's not light.
It's not light.
He did wear it. He did wear it around ISTE for a little bit, which I love.
Yes. I took it to the top of the Philly steps where the Rocky steps.
Perfect.
That felt like really appropriate. I got a shot of that. Yeah.
Can you give us a little taste of your? So for those of you who don't know the way the Poetry Slam works, they have a poem that they come prepared with, and then they have to do an impromptu slide basically presentation, which he also rocked. But I would love a little taste of your poem. Give our listeners just a little bit of that poem because it was based kind of on the Alphabet Soup rap in some ways, right? Yeah.
Alphabet aerobics,
Alphabet aerobics. That's what I'm thinking of. Alphabet Soup. What am I thinking of? It's a fully different rap.
Blackalicious,
Yes, Blackalicious. That was it. Give us a little taste if you have. You have it handy.
All right. Yeah. No. I memorized, I think, the first section of it, so I can easily. So it's
go for it.
Always AI, AR, and apps that are amazing. Accessible Adobe to ace my animations. Brain popping off beats on boards built by Boxlight. Boss Set Bitmoji. Blooming Bookworms is my birthright. Chat GPT comes a common core collapse. Canva creations on my Chromebook are cracked. Dealing with data dank discussions with a Dynavox. Daily doorway diligence. My drone got docs. Engaging everyone. Empathize empatico. Ever fight econ. Expanding my ego. Farfetch, Firefox. Fossil phone. Flashbacks. Fresh shit. Vocabulary. Faster Flipgrid feedback. It keeps going. Girls who code. Anyway, we'll call it there.
Yeah, we can't.
One time.
Yeah. That is awesome. Yeah, you have to be there in person to see the whole thing, folks. So that's the thing. Coming back to defend his title in Denver,
I have ideas for next year. Oh, I definitely have some ideas.
Yeah, got to start workshopping that. I was surprised at the amount of people that didn't use AI. Honestly, I thought everyone's going to use that as their basis, but I think a lot of people, it really came from the heart, or maybe they used it to kind of do some early framing and then they built it out themselves. But it seemed like there was a lot of original poems kind of going on there. I thought, yeah.
Hey, it was way deeper than I anticipated. People really, really pulled out some heart-wrenching, intense stuff. Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, you got to love when educators can get outside of the classroom and still share and still feel creative. You know, as an educator, when you're a student, you think of teachers as these kind of robots that are these higher than whatever. You know, same way when you're a teacher, that's how you look at administrators or district people or whatever. You put them on this different kind of pedestal. But seeing them outside of that space and being able to share and be open and honest, that was one of those things that I love about ISTE itself, but also the Poetry Slam that we were able to put on, just really seeing people in their natural state, being able to have fun and share. But with that being said, there's always a lot of things that go on in our lives that get us all over off kilter. But we ask all of our guests as they come on, what are some things that you do to keep yourself undisrupted with all these things out there? So what are I see you have some board games in the back. I don't know. What is it that you do?
I love a game. I will say to this, I love that your podcast is called Undisrupted, but then it like got me pondering about the idea of like all the things I wish were more disrupted in education. But that's, you know, let me answer Adam's question first. Yeah, games are part of it. I have 2 sons also. One's in middle school, one's in high school. But we play a lot together, and that means video games. That's board games. That's going out and playing soccer. I've gotten into the very good habit late in the time of quarantine when I wasn't not sleeping because I was too busy working to start exercising regularly. And so that's good for me. I'm not like really intense or religious about it or anything, but I make sure I go exercise and move every day, take time to stretch and bend and lift and walk and get in the sunlight somewhat, you know, except for the days when like this skyline of New York City is bright orange because of fires and
haze. Yeah.
I thought that was because Voldemort came back or something, and the Death Eaters were out. That's what
it was.
What I thought.
It was intense. It actually happened to fall at a very weird time because we had a huge event going on right after that, and we were like, "Oh, is this going to get canceled now? We've done so much planning." Oh, no, but it went on. It went on. This was this big esports convention event that we called like our Battle of the Boroughs, where it was this Minecraft education esports / college and career readiness fair / and it was amazing. And to my other points of things I was talking about earlier, I love the fact that in a lot of ways that these esports and other things aren't always equitable and reflective of the larger community. This one, we made conscious steps and efforts to make sure that it was, even to the degree that like the winning juniors team was an all girls team from Staten Island, which you don't really see in those sorts of events.
That's awesome. That is awesome. Where can people find out more? Video games. Where can people find out more about you and your great work, Sean?
I'm on some of the social medias. I don't know what you call the one that used to be with the bird anymore. But like at Sean M. Arnold is on most of them, I think, on the TikToks and the formerly known as the Twitters and the things like that. I have a blog where I write a bunch of stuff and share a lot of my work that you can take and use as your own, braveintheattempt.com, which is a reference to the Special Olympics oath, because I work so much with students with disabilities.
That's awesome.
Awesome.
Well, we should drop those in the show notes. And we want to thank you, Sean, for out there exercising our minds as we talk through all things NYC, poetry. We kind of went all over the place. And now I'm going to pull out the map and start learning about all those other places you mentioned earlier that I have no idea where they are. But thank you for joining us. And for our listeners out there, be sure to subscribe and give us a review. We appreciate it. We might even give you a shout out on a future show. This has been the Undisrupted Podcast, brought to you by All for Ed. He's Adam, and you can follow him on the network formerly known as Twitter at AskAdam3.
And he's Carl, and you can follow him at Mr. Hooker. And remember, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, kids of all ages, we are better together.
And we are better
undisrupted.